The sky turned purple when the ship fell from the stars. Dae-hyun was chopping wood behind his cabin when he saw it. The vessel came down fast, trailing smoke and fire across the evening sky. It wasn't like the mining shuttles that visited the colony every month. This ship was sleek and silver, cutting through the atmosphere like a knife through water. Then it hit the tree line 3 kilometers north, and the forest shook with the impact. He stood there for a moment, axe in hand, debating. The smart thing would be to call the colony administration and let them handle it. That's what a normal person would do. But Dae-hyun hadn't been normal since he left the Marines 5 years ago. He grabbed his emergency pack and his rifle, then headed into the forest. The crash site was easy to find. Smoke rose above the trees, and several smaller fires burned in a trail where the ship had clipped branches on its way down. When he got close, Dae-hyun slowed down and moved carefully. He'd seen enough combat drops to know that crashes attracted scavengers, both animal and otherwise. The ship had carved a deep gouge in the earth before slamming into a rocky outcrop. It was beautiful even in ruin, made of some metal that seemed to shift colors in the fading light. The hull was cracked open like an egg, and he could see expensive-looking furniture scattered around inside. This wasn't a cargo vessel or a scout ship. This was someone important. He heard crying. Dae-hyun moved faster, forgetting caution. Inside the wreckage, he found them. 3 alien children, huddled together in what used to be a sleeping compartment. They looked almost human, but not quite. Their skin had a faint luminescence, and their eyes were larger, colored in shades of silver and gold. The oldest one, maybe 14 in human years, held the 2 younger ones close. All 3 were bleeding. When they saw him, they screamed. "Hey, hey, it's okay," Dae-hyun said, raising his hands. "I'm here to help." The oldest girl said something in a language he didn't understand. Her voice was high and frightened, but she positioned herself between him and the younger children. Brave kid, he thought. Dae-hyun pointed to his medical pack, then to their injuries. The girl hesitated, then nodded slowly. He approached carefully, moving like he was dealing with scared animals. The oldest had a deep cut on her arm. The middle child, around 11, had a bleeding head wound. The youngest, maybe 8, was holding her leg at an odd angle. He worked quickly and efficiently the way he'd been trained. Clean the wounds, apply pressure, seal them with medical foam, stabilize the broken leg with a quick splint. The whole time, the oldest girl watched him with intense focus, ready to fight him if he made one wrong move. "You're safe," he told them, even though they couldn't understand. "I've got you." That's when he heard the engines. Dae-hyun's head snapped up. He knew that sound. Military-grade shuttles, running fast and low. He moved to the crack in the hull and looked out. 3 attack ships were circling the area, searchlights cutting through the growing darkness. But they weren't rescue ships. Rescue ships had bright markings and moved slowly. These were painted matte black, and they were hunting. The oldest girl saw them too. She grabbed his arm and spoke urgently, pointing at the ships, then at her sisters. The message was clear even without translation. Those ships were enemies. Dae-hyun made a decision in half a second. He pointed at himself, then at the 3 girls, then at the forest. "Come with me." The girl understood immediately and started helping her sisters up. The youngest couldn't walk, so Dae-hyun picked her up. She was lighter than he expected, all thin bones and terror. They moved fast through the forest, Dae-hyun leading them away from the crash site. Behind them, he heard the shuttles landing and voices shouting in another alien language. Whoever they were, they'd found the crash. The youngest girl in his arms was shaking. Dae-hyun spoke quietly to her as they ran. "You're doing great. Just a little further. I know a place." The bunker was an old mining survey station, abandoned years ago when the company decided this part of the moon wasn't profitable. Dae-hyun had found it during his first month here and spent weeks making it livable. It was his backup plan, the place he'd go if things went bad. Things had definitely gone bad. He got them inside and sealed the door. The bunker was small but solid, built into the side of a hill with walls that would block most sensors. The 3 girls collapsed onto the floor, exhausted and terrified. Dae-hyun activated the old generator, and lights flickered on. The oldest girl was trying to communicate with him, speaking slowly and making gestures. She pointed at herself and said something that sounded like Lyria. Then she pointed at the middle child and said, Vela, and the youngest, Kes. Names. She was telling him their names. Dae-hyun pointed at himself. Dae-hyun. Lyria tried to repeat it, got it wrong, tried again. When she got it right, she smiled a little despite everything. It was a start. He gave them water and food from his emergency supplies. They ate carefully, watching him the whole time. Kes, the youngest, fell asleep quickly, exhausted from pain and fear. Vela stayed awake, her eyes moving constantly around the bunker, cataloging everything. Lyria didn't sleep at all. She sat near her sisters, keeping watch. Dae-hyun understood. She didn't trust him yet. That was smart. He checked his comm unit. No signal, which was good. It meant the bunker's shielding was working. But it also meant he couldn't call for help, couldn't find out who was chasing these kids or why. Outside, he heard engines in the distance. The hunters were searching the forest, moving in a grid pattern. Professional. Military. They'd find the bunker eventually if they searched long enough. Dae-hyun looked at the 3 alien children in his care. He didn't know who they were or where they came from. He didn't know why someone wanted them badly enough to chase them across star systems. He didn't know if helping them would get him killed. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let those hunters have them. He'd failed to protect his squad 5 years ago. He'd live with that guilt until the day he died. But he wouldn't fail again. Not these kids. Not while he was still breathing. Lyria was watching him, and somehow, he thought she understood what he was thinking. She gave him a small nod, almost respectful. Dae-hyun nodded back and started checking his weapons. If the hunters wanted these children, they'd have to go through him first. And he'd learned a long time ago how to make that very, very expensive. 3 weeks passed in the bunker, and everything changed. The first breakthrough came on day 4 when Dae-hyun managed to repair one of the small devices Lyria carried in her pocket. It looked like a piece of jewelry, but when he got it working again using spare parts from an old radio, it started translating their words. "Thank you," Lyria said, and those were the first words he understood from her. "Thank you for saving us." "Who's hunting you?" Dae-hyun asked. Lyria looked at her sisters, then back at him. "My name is Lyria of House Velarin. These are my sisters Vela and Kes. We are the daughters of Empress Salora, ruler of the Valoran Empire." Dae-hyun stared at her. "Your princesses?" "Yes. We were traveling to a diplomatic summit when our convoy was ambushed. The ships outside are Vorsen clan mercenaries. They want to capture us and use us against our mother." That explained why they were willing to burn down half a forest to find 3 children. Dae-hyun ran a hand through his hair. He'd thought he was protecting refugees, not royalty. The situation was somehow worse than he'd imagined. "Your mother," he said carefully. "She's looking for you." "Yes, but space is vast, and the Vorsans are jamming all our signals. Mother will find us eventually, but we need to survive until she does." The way Lyria said it, like survival was just a matter of time and planning, reminded Dae-hyun of his old commanding officer. This girl was young, but she was trained. That was good. They'd need every advantage. Over the following days, Dae-hyun learned more about his unexpected guests. The Valoran Empire controlled over 200 star systems. They were ancient, powerful, and sophisticated. Humans were barely known to them, a young species that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 20 years ago. "We studied your species in our xenology classes," Vela said one evening. She was the curious one, always asking questions about Earth and human technology. "Humans are considered emerging. Your technology is primitive compared to most galactic civilizations." "Primitive works fine when you know how to use it," Dae-hyun replied. He was teaching them how to purify water using basic filtration when the first hunter patrol came close to the bunker. Dae-hyun saw them on his motion sensors, 4 Vorsen soldiers moving through the forest in formation. They were tall creatures, muscular and covered in dark scales, carrying weapons that made his rifle look like a child's toy. "Stay here," he told the girls. "Stay quiet." Lyria grabbed his arm. "You cannot fight them. They have shields, enhanced armor, thermal imaging. You will die." "Probably," Dae-hyun agreed, "but they won't find you." He slipped out of the bunker before Lyria could argue further. The forest was his territory, and he knew it better than any off-world mercenary. He'd spent 5 years walking these trails, learning which plants were poisonous, where the predators hunted, how the ground changed after rain. The Vorsons were good, but they were overconfident. They relied on their technology, their sensors, and scanners. They didn't watch the ground for tripwires made from fishing line. They didn't notice the cluster of Vespa nests until Dae-hyun's carefully thrown rock disturbed them. The local Vespas were the size of a human fist and extremely territorial. The Vorsons' shields stopped energy weapons, but they did nothing against angry insects. The soldiers broke formation, swatting and cursing. Dae-hyun used the chaos to disappear. When the Vorsons regrouped and continued their patrol, they walked right past the bunker without knowing it was there. When he returned, all 3 girls were staring at him. "You fought 4 armed soldiers with insects and string," Vela said slowly. "I didn't fight them. I avoided them. There's a difference." But Lyria was looking at him differently now. "You are a soldier, not just any soldier. You have combat experience." "Former Marine," Dae-hyun admitted. "Colonial Security Forces. I did my time and got out." "Why did you leave?" Dae-hyun didn't answer that. Some memories were too heavy to share. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation became a strange kind of routine. The Vorsons searched the forest in expanding grids. Dae-hyun led them away from the bunker with false trails and carefully placed distractions. He taught the girls how to move quietly through the forest, how to find food and water, how to read the weather. Kes, the youngest, surprised him. She couldn't walk far because of her leg, but she had a natural talent for understanding the local wildlife. She could predict when the hexwings would flock or when the ground lizards were about to burrow. She turned it into an early warning system, listening to animal sounds to know when the Vorsons were nearby. Vela was different. She wanted to learn everything about human survival tactics. She watched how Dae-hyun moved through the forest, how he planned his routes, how he thought 3 steps ahead. She had a tactical mind, and she was learning fast. Lyria remained protective of her sisters, but she started trusting Dae-hyun. One night, when Kes was sleeping and Vela was studying a map he'd drawn, Lyria asked him the question he'd been avoiding. "Why did you help us? You knew it was dangerous. You could have hidden and let the Vorsons take us." Dae-hyun was quiet for a long moment. "5 years ago, I was on a mission. Corporate security job. Things went bad, and my squad needed extraction. But the company decided it was too expensive, too risky. They left my people to die." He looked at his hands. "I survived. They didn't. So when I saw you 3 in that wreck, scared and hurt, I couldn't walk away. Not again." Lyria reached out and touched his shoulder. It was a formal gesture, something royal and dignified. "You carry your fallen with honor. That is the mark of a true warrior." "I'm not a warrior anymore. I'm just a guy trying to keep 3 kids alive." "You are more than that," Lyria said firmly. "You are teaching us something my tutors never could. You are showing us that strength is not about having the best weapons or the strongest shields. It is about adapting, surviving, refusing to give up." The next day, Vela spotted something in the sky. More Vorson ships, larger ones. They were bringing in serious equipment, atmospheric scanners that could detect life signs through rock and soil. Dae-hyun contacted his old friend Minho, who lived in the main colony settlement. The message was brief and coded, but Minho understood. 3 days later, his friend hiked through the forest with a pack full of supplies, weapons, and information. "You've got half the Vorson fleet blockading this moon," Minho said, looking at the 3 princesses with wide eyes. "No ships in or out. They're willing to level sections of forest to find these kids." "Then we can't run forever," Dae-hyun said. "What are you thinking?" Dae-hyun smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was the expression he wore when planning missions back in the Marines. "I'm thinking we stop hiding and start hunting." Lyria stepped forward. "You want to attack them?" "I want to make them think they're facing an army instead of one human and three princesses. I want them scared, confused, and making mistakes." Vela's eyes lit up. "Guerrilla warfare. I have read about human tactics. You fight with speed and deception instead of direct force." "Exactly." Minho shook his head, grinning. "You always did like impossible odds." Daehyun looked at the three girls. These alien princesses who'd learned to move through the forest like ghosts, who'd stopped flinching at every sound, who trusted him with their lives. "They're not impossible," he said. "The Vorsons just don't know what they're dealing with yet." The hunt was about to change. The prey was becoming the predator. The Vorson commander was named Thrax, and he was starting to think this simple recovery mission had become his worst nightmare. He stood in his command tent, studying reports that made no sense. 12 soldiers injured in various accidents. 3 transport vehicles disabled by what looked like primitive explosives. 2 scout drones destroyed by some kind of electromagnetic pulse. And most embarrassing of all, his elite tracker team had spent 6 hours wandering in circles after someone rerouted their navigation systems. "It is just one human," his second officer said. "Our intelligence confirms there is only one adult human in this sector." "One human is destroying my operation," Thrax growled. "Find him. Kill him. Bring me those princesses." But finding Daehyun was like catching smoke. The humans seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. He struck at night, sabotaging equipment and vanishing before reinforcements arrived. He used the forest itself as a weapon, leading patrols into quicksand bogs or through territory where the local predators hunted. He'd somehow figured out the Vorson communication frequencies and fed them false information, sending teams to empty locations while he hit their supply depot. What Thrax didn't know was that he wasn't facing just one human. He was facing one human who'd learned from 3 very intelligent princesses. In the bunker, Daehyun spread out a hand-drawn map while Lyria, Vela, and Kess gathered around. "The Vorsons have established a main base here," Lyria said, pointing to a mark on the map. "That is where their commander will be. My tutors taught me Vorson military doctrine. They prefer centralized command structures. Which means if we disrupt their leadership, the entire operation falls apart," Vela added. She'd been studying Daehyun's tactics obsessively, combining them with her own knowledge of alien military strategy. "But their base has too many soldiers. A direct attack is suicide." "We don't attack it," Daehyun said. "We make them abandon it." Kess looked up from her corner, where she'd been monitoring the sounds of the forest through a makeshift listening device. "The Razorbacks are migrating. I can hear them moving through the western valley." Daehyun smiled. Razorbacks were massive herbivores, peaceful unless threatened. But when they migrated, they moved in herds of hundreds, trampling everything in their path. And their migration route went right through where the Vorsons had set up their base. "Can you predict when they'll arrive?" he asked Kess. The youngest princess closed her eyes, listening to sounds he couldn't hear. 2 days, maybe 3. They follow the blooming of the night flowers. Then we have 2 days to make sure the Razorbacks go exactly where we want them. Over the next 48 hours, they work together like a team that had been fighting together for years instead of weeks. Minho provided technical support, helping Daehyun build devices that would emit sounds that attracted the Razorbacks. Vela calculated the best placement for these devices, creating a path that would lead the herd directly through the Vorson base. Lyria used her knowledge of Vorson psychology to predict how they'd react. And Kess, with her gift for understanding animal behavior, fine-tuned the plan. When the Razorbacks came, it was beautiful chaos. The herd numbered over 300, each animal the size of a small vehicle, with thick armor plating and horns that could punch through steel. They stampeded through the Vorson base at dawn, destroying tents, crushing equipment, and sending soldiers scrambling for safety. By the time the herd passed, the base was ruins. Thrax ordered his forces to regroup at the secondary camp, but that was exactly what Daehyun wanted. Concentrated forces meant concentrated supplies, and concentrated supplies meant a single point of failure. 3 nights later, Dae-hyun and Vela moved through the darkness toward the supply depot. The princess had insisted on coming despite his protests, and he'd learned she was too stubborn to argue with. "Stay close," he whispered. "Follow my steps exactly." They moved like shadows, avoiding sensor sweeps and guard patrols. Vela was surprisingly good at this. She'd learned to control her breathing, to place her feet carefully, to freeze when danger was near. She was becoming a soldier, Dae-hyun realized. A very young, very alien soldier, but a soldier nonetheless. They reached the supply depot and planted their devices. Not explosives, though the Vorsons would wish it was that simple. These were jammers and signal disruptors that Minho had built, designed to make every piece of Vorson technology malfunction at random intervals. As they retreated, Vela suddenly grabbed his arm and pulled him behind a large rock. A Vorson patrol passed within meters of their position, talking in their harsh language. The translator device gave Dae-hyun the words. "The commander is furious. He says the human must have military training. More than training. He fights like a ghost. Our sensors cannot track him. It is embarrassing. We are elite hunters, and one primitive human is making us look like fools." When they were gone, Vela looked at Dae-hyun with bright eyes. "They fear you." "They should fear all of us," Dae-hyun replied. Back at the bunker, he found Lyria having a difficult conversation with Kes. The youngest princess was crying, something about missing their mother, about being scared that she'd never see home again. Lyria looked helpless, unsure how to comfort her sister. Dae-hyun sat down next to Kes. "You know what I do when I'm scared?" he asked. Kes shook her head, wiping her eyes. "I think about Earth, my home planet. It's a dangerous place. We have storms that can destroy cities, predators that can kill you in seconds, diseases that can wipe out millions. But humans survived all of that. You know how?" "How?" Kes asked quietly. "We didn't give up, ever. When something knocked us down, we got back up. When we didn't have the right tools, we made new ones. When we were scared, we stayed scared but kept moving forward anyway." He smiled at her. "You're doing that right now. You're scared, but you're still here, still helping, still being brave. That makes you stronger than you know." Kes hugged him then, this small alien child who smelled like strange flowers and starlight. Over her head, Dae-hyun saw Lyria watching with an expression he couldn't quite read. That night, Lyria asked him about his squad, the one that died. He told her the whole story, how they'd been hired to protect a mining facility from pirates, how the fight went bad, how he'd called for extraction and the company refused because it would cost too much, how he'd been the only survivor because he'd run when he should have stayed and fought. "You feel guilt," Lyria said. "It wasn't a question." "Every day. Then you dishonor them." Dae-hyun looked at her, surprised and a little angry. Lyria's expression was serious but kind. "You survived because you were trained to survive. Your squad would not want you to carry shame for that. They would want you to live, to use the skills they helped teach you. You honor them by protecting others, not by drowning in guilt." Her words hit harder than any weapon could. Dae-hyun realized this 14-year-old alien princess understood things about loss and duty that had taken him years to even approach. "Your father," he said quietly. "You mentioned he died." Lyria's face went carefully blank. "He was assassinated 2 years ago. The convoy ambush was not random. Someone wants to destroy the royal line. Someone is trying to break my mother by taking everything she loves." "We won't let them," Dae-hyun said firmly. "No," Lyria agreed. "We will not." The next morning, Minho arrived with news. The Vorsons are pulling back. They're consolidating near the crash site, probably planning one final sweep before they give up and leave. Dae-hyun shook his head. "They won't leave. They can't go back to whoever hired them without the princesses. They'll get desperate." "Desperate enemies make mistakes," Vela said. She was right. 3 days later, the Vorsons made their biggest mistake yet. They brought in atmospheric drones with enough firepower to burn sections of forest, trying to flush out their targets. But before they could launch the assault, the sky split open with light. Ships were arriving. Not Vorson ships, These were bigger, more elegant, and infinitely more deadly. Warships that made the Vorsen blockade look like toys. Kess saw them first and started laughing with joy. "It is Mother! Mother found us!" The Valoran Imperial fleet had arrived, and the hunt was about to end. The Vorsen blockade didn't stand a chance. Dae-Hyun watched from the forest as the battle unfolded in the sky above. The Valoran warships moved with terrifying precision, their weapons turning the Vorsen vessels into clouds of debris. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Within minutes, the few Vorson ships that hadn't been destroyed were fleeing at maximum speed, jumping to faster-than-light travel in their panic to escape. The forest floor shook as the largest Valoran ship descended. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of any vessel Dae-Hyun had seen before. The hull was white and gold, decorated with symbols that seemed to shift and flow like liquid light. This was a ship built to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. "The Eternal Horizon," Lyria whispered. "Mother's personal dreadnought." The 3 princesses stood together, suddenly looking very royal despite their dirty clothes and tangled hair. Kess was bouncing with excitement, but even she seemed nervous. They hadn't seen their mother in weeks, and they'd been through things that would have broken most adults. Landing craft deployed from the massive ship, sleek and fast. Soldiers poured out, forming defensive perimeters with military efficiency. These weren't mercenaries or hired hunters. These were the Imperial Guard, elite warriors who'd trained their entire lives. Each one wore armor that seemed alive, shifting colors to match their surroundings. And then she appeared. Empress Salora stepped from her shuttle, and Dae-Hyun understood immediately why she ruled over 200 star systems. She was tall, almost 3 meters, with skin that glowed like moonlight. Her eyes were pure silver, ancient and knowing. She wore robes that seemed made of captured starlight, and when she moved, the air itself seemed to bend around her in respect. She was the most beautiful and terrifying thing Dae-Hyun had ever seen. "Stay behind me," he told the girls quietly, stepping forward with his rifle lowered but ready. The Imperial Guard moved immediately, weapons rising, but the Empress raised one hand and they froze. "Mother!" Kess broke away from Lyria and ran forward. The Empress knelt, catching her youngest daughter in her arms. For a moment, the ancient ruler disappeared, and there was only a mother holding her child. Lyria and Vela joined them, and Dae-Hyun watched the reunion with a mixture of relief and something like sadness. His job was done. The girls were safe. Soon they'd leave this moon and return to their empire, and he'd go back to his cabin and his quiet life. But then Lyria turned and pointed at him. "Mother, this is Dae-Hyun. He saved us. He protected us from the Vorsons. He kept us alive." Every eye turned to him. The Imperial Guard studied him with professional assessment. The Empress looked at him with those silver eyes that seemed to see through flesh and bone straight to his soul. She approached, and Dae-Hyun had to force himself not to step back. He'd faced combat drops and hostile aliens, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer presence of this being. "You are human," the Empress said. Her voice was like music and thunder combined. "Yes, Your Majesty. My intelligence reports suggest your species is emerging. Unrefined. You have been citizens of the galactic community for less than 1 generation." "That's accurate, Your Majesty." The Empress circled him slowly, studying him like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. "Yet you stood against Vorsen clan hunters who have operated in this sector for 1,000 years. You protected my daughters with primitive weapons and, as Lyria tells me, frightening creativity." Dae-Hyun didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. "Why?" the Empress asked, stopping in front of him. "Why did you risk your life for alien children you did not know?" The answer came easily. "Because they needed help, and I was there." The Empress stared at him for a long moment. Then, impossibly, she smiled. It was a small expression, almost hidden, but it transformed her face from terrifying to merely awe-inspiring. A simple answer, perhaps the truest kind. She turned to her daughters. "Tell me everything." Over the next hour, the 3 princesses explained their ordeal. Lyria spoke of the crash and how Dae-Hyun had pulled them from the wreckage. Vela described the tactics he'd taught them, the way he'd turned the forest into a weapon. Kess talked about the stories he'd told her, about Earth and humanity and refusing to give up. The Empress listened to everything, her expression unreadable. When they finished, she turned back to Dae-hyun. "You taught my daughters to fight like humans. I taught them to survive, Your Majesty. Is there a difference?" "For humans, not really." The Empress actually laughed at that, a sound like crystal bells. Her daughters looked shocked. Apparently, the Empress didn't laugh often. "I offer you a reward," she said. "Anything within my considerable power. Wealth beyond measure. Technology that would advance your entire species. A position in my court. Genetic enhancements that would let you live for centuries. Name it, and it is yours." Dae-hyun thought about it. He could ask for things that would change his life, maybe even change humanity's future. But he knew himself well enough to know what would make him happy. "I appreciate the offer, Your Majesty, but I'm fine. I have what I need." The Empress raised one elegant eyebrow. "You refuse?" "I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do." "Mother," Lyria stepped forward, "I have a request." "Speak, daughter." "I want Dae-hyun as my military advisor. I am heir to the throne, and I will need people who understand unconventional warfare. People who cannot be bought or intimidated. People who understand what it means to protect others." Vela added, "I want him to train our Imperial Guard in human combat tactics. They are skilled, but they rely too heavily on technology. Dae-hyun showed me that sometimes the simplest solution is the best one." Kess simply said, "I want him to visit and tell me more stories." The Empress looked at her daughters, then at Dae-hyun, then back at her daughters. "You have all become attached to this human." "He is more than human," Lyria said firmly. "He is a warrior, a teacher, and a friend. He is someone who will tell you the truth even when it is difficult. We need people like that." The Empress was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "You are right. I have advisors who tell me what I want to hear. I have generals who think only in terms of overwhelming force. I have diplomats who see every interaction as a negotiation." She looked at Dae-hyun. "But I do not have someone who would protect 3 alien children simply because it was right." She moved closer, and Dae-hyun realized this ancient, powerful being was making him an offer that would change everything. "There is a conspiracy in my empire," the Empress said quietly. "Someone orchestrated the convoy ambush. Someone wants my daughters dead and my line ended. I need someone outside the traditional power structures, someone who cannot be corrupted or controlled." Her silver eyes met his. "I need someone human. Your Majesty, I'm just a retired Marine. You are exactly what I need. A man who thinks like a survivor, who fights like someone with everything to lose, who values life over politics." Dae-hyun looked at the 3 princesses. Lyria stood tall and dignified, already every inch the future Empress. Vela watched him with bright, curious eyes, her tactical mind already planning how to use him. Kess smiled at him with absolute trust. He thought about his cabin, his quiet life, his self-imposed isolation. He thought about the squad he'd lost and the guilt he'd carried for 5 years. He thought about what Lyria had said, that he honored his fallen by protecting others. "I have conditions," he said. The Imperial Guard shifted nervously. Nobody made conditions with the Empress, but she simply nodded. "Speak them." "My friend Minho comes with me. Any humans who work for you answer to human command, not Imperial bureaucracy. And if I think something is wrong, I get to say so, even if you don't want to hear it. You demand autonomy, honesty, and loyalty to your own people above my empire." "Yes, Your Majesty." The Empress smiled again, wider this time. "You negotiate like someone who expects to be refused. That is refreshing." She extended her hand, a very human gesture. "I accept your conditions, Dae-hyun of Earth. Welcome to the Imperial service." He shook her hand, and her skin was warm and slightly electric. "One more thing," the Empress said. "The conspiracy I mentioned? I believe it involves members of my own court." High-ranking nobles who see my daughters as obstacles to their own power. You want me to find them. I want you to protect my daughters while I root out the traitors. Can you do that? Dae-hyun looked at Lyria, Vela, and Kess. 3 alien princesses who'd learned to move through forests like ghosts, who'd faced death and survived, who trusted him with their lives. Yes, your majesty, he said. I can do that. The eternal horizon was beyond anything Dae-hyun had imagined a ship could be. He stood in his assigned quarters, which were larger than his entire cabin had been, staring out a window that showed the vast darkness of space. They'd left the moon 3 days ago, and he was still adjusting to life aboard an Imperial dreadnought. Minho whistled from the doorway. This is insane. We went from chopping wood to living on a warship that could probably destroy a planet. Yeah, Dae-hyun agreed. Insane pretty much covers it. His friend had agreed to come along, though he'd spent the first 2 days convinced this was all an elaborate dream. Now he was helping Dae-hyun assemble a team of human specialists. The Empress had given them permission to recruit anyone they wanted, and they were choosing carefully. Combat veterans, tactical analysts, engineers who could think creatively. People who understood that sometimes the best solution wasn't the most advanced one. There was a knock at the door. Vela entered without waiting for an answer, carrying a datapad that glowed with symbols Dae-hyun was slowly learning to read. I have compiled a list of suspicious activities in the Imperial Court, she announced. 17 nobles who had the resources to hire Vorsan mercenaries. 9 who would benefit from our deaths. 3 who were in the right position to know about our travel route. You've been investigating your mother's court? Dae-hyun asked. Of course. Someone tried to kill my sisters and me. I want to know who. Vela's eyes were hard. She'd changed over the past weeks, becoming sharper and more focused. Mother is handling the political aspects, but I thought you might want to know the military details. She was right. Dae-hyun studied the list, memorizing names and positions. These weren't street thugs or simple mercenaries. These were powerful beings with armies at their command and centuries of experience in galactic politics. We're going to need more than good tactics, he said. That is why Mother is assigning you a security detail. Imperial Guard who answer directly to you. Vela paused. They are not happy about taking orders from a human. I bet they're not. The meeting with the Imperial Guard was tense. 20 elite warriors stood in formation, each one looking at Dae-hyun with barely concealed skepticism. Their commander, a tall alien named Crix, spoke for them all. You are human. Your species has barely left your home system, yet the Empress says we must learn from you. Crix's tone made it clear what he thought of that idea. Dae-hyun had dealt with this kind of attitude before in the Marines. New recruits always thought they were too good to learn from anyone else. Tell me, he said calmly. How many of you have fought against an enemy with superior technology? Silence. How many of you have won a battle where you were outnumbered, outgunned, and given up for dead? More silence. I have, multiple times. Not because I'm special, but because I had to adapt or die. Dae-hyun walked along the line of guards. Your shields can stop energy weapons, right? What happens when the enemy uses kinetic weapons? Or biological attacks? Or just waits until your shield generators run out of power? Crix's expression shifted slightly. We train for various scenarios. Good. Then you'll have no problem with the training exercise, you against me. If you win, I'll tell the Empress I'm not qualified to train you. If I win, you listen to what I have to teach. The guards looked at each other. Crix smiled. Agreed. What are the parameters? Simple capture scenario. You hunt me through the ship's training deck. No lethal weapons, but everything else is fair. It took the Imperial Guard 4 hours to find him. 4 hours of searching a training area they knew perfectly, with all their advanced sensors and coordinated tactics. When they finally cornered him in what they thought was a dead end, Dae-hyun had already looped around behind them using maintenance tunnels they didn't know existed. He tagged Crix with a training marker before the commander even knew he was there. How? Crix demanded. You relied on your sensors. I relied on watching where you walked, listening to how you communicated, understanding how you think. Dae-hyun grinned. Technology is great until it isn't. Then you need to know how to fight without it. After that, the Imperial Guard started listening. Lyria found him 2 days later in one of the ship's observation decks. She stood beside him, looking out at the stars. "We are approaching the capital," she said quietly. "The Eternal City. You will meet the full Imperial Court." "Looking forward to it," Daehyun lied. Lyria smiled slightly. "You are a terrible liar, but I appreciate the effort." She was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to thank you for everything." "You already thanked me." "Not properly." Lyria turned to face him. "You gave us more than protection. You gave us confidence. You showed us that being weak can make you strong if you use it correctly. That limitations force creativity. That survival is not about having the best equipment, but about having the will to keep fighting. You would have figured that out eventually. Perhaps. But we might have been dead before we did." Lyria reached into her robes and pulled out a bracelet made of some material that looked like woven starlight. "This is star silk. It will translate any language automatically and mark you as being under Imperial protection. It is also a communicator. If you ever need help, press here and the signal will reach me anywhere in the Empire." Daehyun took the bracelet carefully. It was incredibly light, almost weightless. "Thank you." "There is something else you should know," Lyria said. "Mother is not just assigning you to protect us. She is making you the official liaison between humanity and the Valoran Empire." "What does that mean?" "It means your species will receive preferential trade agreements, protection from hostile civilizations, and access to technology that would normally take centuries to develop." Lyria smiled. "Mother is elevating humanity's status in the galactic community, because one human showed her that your species has value beyond technology." Daehyun felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders. His actions would affect all of humanity now. Every human colony, every ship, every person trying to make a life among the stars. "I hope I don't mess this up," he said quietly. "You will do fine. You are good at adapting." That night, Kes came to his quarters with a drawing she'd made. It showed the four of them, him and the three princesses, standing together in the forest. She'd drawn him much taller than he actually was, and given him a cape he'd never worn. "This is for you," she said. "So you remember us. I could never forget you three." "Promise?" Kes asked, suddenly looking very young. "Promise." She hugged him, then ran off before he could say anything else. Daehyun looked at the drawing, this child's artwork that somehow captured everything that had happened. 3 alien princesses and a human who'd been in the right place at the right time. Or maybe it was the wrong place at the wrong time, and he'd made it right. The Eternal City was spectacular. It floated in space, a construction of crystal and light that housed billions of beings from hundreds of species. The Eternal Horizon docked at the royal platform, and Daehyun got his first look at true imperial power. The court was filled with nobles who'd lived for centuries, beings of immense power and influence. They looked at him with curiosity, disdain, or calculation. He was the human who'd saved the princesses, the primitive who'd defeated Vorsan hunters, the anomaly that didn't fit their understanding of how the galaxy worked. Empress Salora made the announcement formal. Daehyun of Earth was now the imperial protector and human liaison. He would answer only to her and would have authority to act in defense of the royal family. Several nobles objected. One, a being made of crystallized energy, spoke loudly about how humans were too young, too violent, too unpredictable. The Empress silenced him with a look. "My daughters are alive because of this human's violence and unpredictability. If that offends you, you are welcome to resign your position." The noble stayed silent. Later, in a private meeting, the Empress laid out the situation. "I have identified 3 primary suspects in the conspiracy. All are powerful, all are dangerous, and all will try to kill you the moment they realize you are investigating them." "Good thing I'm hard to kill," Daehyun said. The Empress smiled. "Yes, I am beginning to understand that about humans." She handed him a data crystal. "This contains everything I know about the conspiracy. Study it. Plan your approach. And remember, in the Imperial Court, everyone has secrets. Your advantage is that you are too new to have any. Over the following weeks, Dae-hyun settled into his new role. He trained the Imperial Guard in unconventional tactics. He met with human representatives and helped negotiate trade agreements. He attended court functions and learned the complicated dance of imperial politics. And through it all, he protected the three princesses who'd changed his life. Lyria was being groomed to become empress, attending diplomatic meetings and learning statecraft. But she still made time to discuss tactics with him, to learn more about human history and warfare. Vela threw herself into military studies, combining Valoran strategic doctrine with human guerrilla tactics. She was creating something new, a hybrid approach that terrified the old generals. Kes studied xenobiology and diplomacy, but she also came to his quarters every few days to hear stories about Earth. She wanted to visit it someday, she said, to see the death world that created beings like Dae-hyun. Minho found him one evening, looking out at the city lights. You know this is crazy, right? We went from isolated miners to players in galactic politics. Yeah, Dae-hyun agreed. Completely crazy. You regret it? Dae-hyun thought about the three girls who'd crashed into his life, about the Empress who'd given humanity a chance, about the conspiracy he was hunting and the guard he was training, about the fact that his actions might help shape humanity's future among the stars. No, he said, I don't regret it. Because 5 years ago he'd failed his squad. He'd lived with that guilt every day since. But now he had a second chance, a chance to protect people who needed him, a chance to make a difference. The three princesses had needed a guardian, and he'd been there. Now the galaxy was watching to see what one human could do. Dae-hyun smiled. They were about to find out. The adventure was just beginning.